The night air over Detroit was heavy, a kind of exhausted stillness that only came after long hours of fluorescent light and quiet suffering. Outside St. Agnes Medical Center, the city's hum dimmed to a distant drone of tires on wet asphalt. The parking lot lamps flickered in pale orange halos, catching the glint of rain puddles and the soft steam rising from the grates. Amy Calder pressed her badge against the side door one last time that night. Beep. The familiar sound should have meant relief. It didn't. Her 12-hour shift had ended at 6:07 a.m. It was already 6:45, and she was still there, tying her hair back with the same trembling hands that had held a dying man's wrist only an hour ago. She looked smaller than usual, scrubs wrinkled, eyes shadowed, but her movements were precise, deliberate, as though she were performing a ritual. She checked the contents of her bag twice. Wallet. Keys. A flash drive taped to the inside lining. "Going home, Ames?" called a voice from behind. It was Janine, the charge nurse, juggling a styrofoam cup of coffee and the weight of another night in the ICU. Amy managed a tired smile. "Yeah. Finally." Janine frowned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Amy almost laughed, a hollow, breathless sound. "Just another Tuesday." They exchanged quick goodbyes, the kind where both knew they'd be back in 12 hours to do it all again. Then Amy stepped out into the parking lot. Rain began to fall, thin, cold, insistent. The hospital loomed behind her, its tall windows glowing like watchful eyes. She walked briskly toward her car, hugging her jacket tight, but halfway there, she stopped. Her reflection stared back from the rear window of her silver Honda Civic, warped by droplets. Something felt off. A security light near the corner was out. The same one that had been flickering for days. She glanced around, empty lot, mostly. Except for a black SUV parked 2 rows over, engine idling, windows tinted dark. Amy hesitated. Her pulse quickened. She unlocked her car and slid inside, closing the door softly, almost soundlessly. The steering wheel was cold beneath her palms. She started the engine, the hum steady, familiar, and exhaled. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, one new message, Dr. Ravi D. "Still up? We need to talk before morning rounds. Urgent." She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she stared at the hospital entrance. Through the fogged windshield, she could see Janine crossing the lobby, stopping to sign a chart. The automatic doors opened and closed behind her, again and again, a rhythmic pulse. Amy's fingers drummed against the steering wheel. She was supposed to drive home, shower, sleep, and forget the images from tonight. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching her all shift. In the ICU, in the stairwell, even in the supply room. The doors of the SUV opened briefly, a silhouette inside, then shut again. She tried to breathe. "You're just tired, Ames." Overtired. Paranoid. A sudden knock on her window made her jump. It was Officer Keene, the hospital security guard, gray mustache, tired eyes, always too friendly. "Everything okay, Miss Calder?" he asked, bending slightly to see her. Amy rolled the window down a crack. "Yes, I'm fine. Just finishing some messages. Lots emptying out quick tonight. Be safe heading home." "I will. Thanks." He nodded, lingered a moment too long, then walked off toward the back gate. Amy waited until he disappeared behind the maintenance building. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope marked, "To be delivered, confidential." Inside were printed patient charts, irregular organ transfer records, duplicate death certificates, names she couldn't unsee. She'd told Ravi she'd hand it over to the journalist tomorrow. She'd promised herself she would. But tomorrow felt far away. Maybe she could drop it at the mailbox tonight, before heading home. Just in case. Her headlights illuminated the mist as she pulled out of the space, moving slowly toward the exit. The black SUV remained still. The hospital faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the empty Detroit streets that led to the highway. Amy's phone vibrated again. "Amy. Do not leave the hospital. They know." The message froze her mid-turn. She stopped the car right there at the gate. Rain streaked across the windshield like veins of glass. "Who knows?" she whispered. But the answer came too late. A shadow passed behind her car, quick, silent, purposeful. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She looked in the mirror, nothing but the SUV lights turning toward her, slow and deliberate. Amy's trembling hand reached for her phone, but it slipped, falling between the seats. She bent down to grab it, panic tightening her throat. When she rose again, the SUV was closer. Headlights flaring. She threw the car into reverse, tires screeching on the wet pavement. The SUV didn't follow. It simply idled there, as if waiting. Then, silence. Her engine sputtered. Died. Amy pressed the ignition again. Nothing. The lights flickered. The wipers stilled mid-swipe. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the car roof like impatient fingers. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror, pale, eyes wide, breath fogging the glass. And then, a flash. The briefest glimpse of movement outside her window. A figure, umbrella folded, walking fast toward her car. She opened her mouth to speak, but the world tilted, a sharp jolt, a breathless gasp, the sound of her door swinging open. And then nothing. 6:57 a.m. A hospital janitor noticed the silver Honda still running near the east gate. The driver's seat empty. Engine humming softly. Amy Calder's phone lay glowing on the passenger seat, screen cracked, one message half-typed. Ravi, they're here. By sunrise, Amy Calder was nowhere in Detroit. 2 weeks before her disappearance, Amy Calder was the kind of nurse every hospital wished they could clone. She worked without complaint, remembered every patient's name, and somehow managed to make dying people laugh. Even the janitors noticed her kindness. She'd bring extra coffee for the night staff and handwrite thank you notes after tough shifts. But lately, she'd started to forget small things, chart signatures, meal breaks, her own phone charger. And when she did, she'd freeze for just a second too long, as if something else was pulling at her thoughts. It was a Thursday morning, mid-February 2012. The ICU smelled of disinfectant and strong coffee. Amy was checking the vitals of Mrs. Havers, an elderly heart patient who had survived 3 surgeries and 2 husbands, when Dr. Ravi Deshmukh walked in. Ravi was the kind of doctor who wore exhaustion like a badge of honor, unshaven, charming in a disheveled way, always holding 2 pagers and a cup of green tea. He'd been Amy's closest friend since she joined St. Agnes 4 years earlier. Morning, Calder, he said, flipping through a chart. You look like you've been personally wrestling with death again. Amy smiled faintly. He's winning on points, but I'm holding my own. Ravi grinned. Then he caught the subtle tremor in her hand as she adjusted Mrs. Havers for. You okay? He asked quietly. Fine, she replied, too quickly. When the patient was stable and sleeping, Amy motioned for Ravi to follow her into the medication room. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. I found something strange in the patient records, she whispered, pulling open a drawer. Inside was a stack of photocopied discharge summaries. 3 of our donors, listed as deceased within 24 hours of being transferred to another facility. But there's no record of where they went. Ravi frowned. Transfers happen all the time. Maybe. Not like this, she cut in. The paperwork's identical. Same phrasing. Same attending physician signature, only that doctor retired 2 years ago. Ravi's brow furrowed. You're saying someone's forging records? Amy didn't answer. Instead, she handed him a folded list from her pocket, names highlighted in yellow, the top one circled twice. Recognize any of them? She asked. Ravi's face paled. The first name, Tyrone Ian McGill, had been one of his transplant patients last fall. He was supposed to receive a kidney, Ravi murmured. But the surgery was cancelled. They said the donor organ wasn't viable. Amy nodded slowly. And yet that same organ ID shows as transferred to another facility 2 days later. No record, no consent form, no trace. They stood in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room. Finally, Ravi sighed. Amy, maybe you should let administration handle this. I did, she said flatly. They told me to focus on patient care and stop digging through files that aren't my concern. That sounds like something they'd say when it is your concern, Ravi muttered. Amy gave a weary smile. You sound like me now. That evening, Amy sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a sandwich that had long gone cold. The lunchroom TV played muted news about city layoffs and rising crime. Around her, nurses chatted about reality shows and weekend plans. But Amy's gaze stayed fixed on the window reflection, her own face, pale under fluorescent light, eyes haunted. She opened her bag and pulled out her phone. The screen showed an unsent draft message addressed to a Detroit Free Press journalist. I have information regarding possible medical corruption and illegal organ transfers at St. Agnes Medical Center. My name is. Her thumb hovered over send. Then she deleted her name. A shadow fell across her table. You've been staring at that sandwich for 15 minutes, Ravi said, sitting down opposite her. She forced a chuckle. Just waiting for it to resuscitate itself. Listen, Ravi said, lowering his voice. If you think something's happening here, we need proof. Real proof. Files, timestamps, not just rumors. I'm working on it, she said softly. But every time I log into the record system, certain files vanish the next day. Maybe it's just a data glitch. Or maybe someone's making sure they disappear. Ravi rubbed his forehead. Amy, if this is what I think it is, then it's bigger than both of us. She met his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, he saw the fear she'd been hiding behind her steady voice. 2 nights later, Amy was assigned to the post-op ward. A patient coded unexpectedly, a 39-year-old man, no family listed, brought in from a transfer unit. She did everything right, compressions, epinephrine, shock, but he didn't make it. She filled out the death report automatically, numb from habit. As she signed the form, something on the clipboard caught her eye, a red sticker marked donor, priority clearance. She frowned. That sticker wasn't hospital standard. It looked like one from an external logistics company. She peeled it off, stuck it in her pocket, and continued her rounds. At 2:15 a.m., she passed the morgue hallway. The light above the door was flickering. She paused, listening. Voices. 2 men talking quietly. Pickup's delayed again, one said. You think she's gonna notice? Doesn't matter, said the other. They sign what we give them. Nobody checks the freezer logs anyway. A metallic clang echoed. Amy froze, her heart pounding. The men stepped out, wheeling a covered gurney. She turned away quickly, pretending to study a supply list. When they passed, she slipped into the morgue. The air was cold enough to sting. She moved between metal drawers until she found the open one, tag hanging loose, name smudged, date blank. On the counter beside it lay a sealed container labeled for research shipment, handle with care. Through the frost on the plastic, she saw something pale. Human. Her stomach turned. She stepped back, breathing hard, clutching the sticker still in her pocket. Footsteps in the hallway. She killed the light and ducked behind a shelf of medical supplies, holding her breath. The door creaked open. A flashlight beam swept the room. Forgot to lock up again, said a voice. You want to get written up? The door shut. Locks clicked. Silence returned. Amy waited a full minute before slipping out, heart hammering so loudly she thought it would give her away. At 5:45 a.m., when her shift finally ended, she returned to her locker. Inside was a folded piece of paper, no name, no handwriting, just 6 typed words. Stop asking questions. You're being watched. Her hands trembled. She looked around. No one seemed to notice her panic. The hallway buzzed with the casual chatter of nurses finishing their rounds. She stuffed the note into her pocket, along with the red sticker, and forced herself to walk calmly out of the ward. As she passed the nurse's station, Ravi called out, "Hey, Ames, you left your ID in the break room." She turned, managing a smile. "Keep it safe for me. I'll need it tomorrow." It was the last normal thing she ever said inside St. Agnes. The corridors of St. Agnes were never truly dark. Even at 3 a.m., when the ward sank into uneasy silence, every surface hummed under fluorescent light. Amy used to find the half-sleeping hospital comforting. Now the brightness only made her feel watched. She had promised herself she would stop looking. The note in her locker still sat folded inside her wallet, its typewritten thread burning against her palm each time she reached for her ID. But curiosity, or conscience, had a way of eroding promises. That night she volunteered for the overflow shift, an excuse to stay near the ICU computers after most staff had gone home. A blizzard hissed against the windows, and the heating system rattled like old bones. She told the charge nurse she'd update patient charts. In truth, she was copying backup files onto a small blue flash drive. The progress bar crept forward, 73%? 74%? Working late again. Calder? Amy jumped. It was Mark Lindell, an orderly built like a linebacker and perpetually chewing gum. He leaned in the doorway, bored. Just catching up, she said, sliding the drive into her pocket. Yeah, sure. You nurses never quit. His grin was too wide. Careful. Management might start charging rent. When he left, she exhaled shakily. Her screen now read file transfer complete. She ejected the drive, tucked it inside her shoe, and forced herself to finish the real charting so no one would notice the detour. At 4 a.m. a code blue alarm jolted the floor. Amy rushed with the team to room 312, an elderly man who had collapsed post-surgery. They worked fast, but within minutes his monitor flatlined. Death came quiet and clinical, time, 4:17 a.m. After signing the report, Amy headed toward the morgue to hand off the body form. Halfway down the stairwell she caught a low conversation. Two male voices drifted upward. Shipments moved up. They wanted out before sunrise. Same contact? Same van, same driver. Just make sure the paperwork's clean this time. Amy froze. The voices belonged to Lindell and someone she didn't recognize, deep-voiced, deliberate. She pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering, and listened as the men's footsteps echoed away. She descended slowly, shoes squeaking on the tile. The morgue door stood ajar. Inside, the air carried the antiseptic chill she'd come to dread. A wheeled crate sat in the center of the room, stamped biological specimen, for research. She edged closer, pulled back the tarp an inch. A stainless steel container lay within, condensation beating on its lid. Through the plastic window she glimpsed a label with a name she recognized, Edward Crane, ICU 4A, the same man who'd just died upstairs. Amy's breath caught. He hadn't even been declared for donation. There was no consent form, no transplant match request. Yet here he was, already tagged for research. A sudden whir of the refrigeration units made her flinch. She lowered the tarp, backing away. That's when she noticed the computer terminal in the corner, its screen still logged in under an administrative account. Lines of data scrolled across it, organ IDs, weights, destinations. One entry blinked red, transfer, outbound/clearance, AG12, research/courier, KL. She pulled her phone, snapping 2 quick photos. Her hands shook so badly that the second image blurred, but it would have to do. A floorboard creaked behind her. Amy spun around. The doorway was filled by Lindell's silhouette. Night shift's quiet tonight, he said casually, stepping inside. What brings you down here? Her throat went dry. Paperwork for a patient. I couldn't find the right form. He walked closer, eyes flicking to the crate. You shouldn't be in here without clearance, you know. I was just leaving. He smiled, gum snapping. Sure you were. She edged toward the exit. Mark, it's freezing. I'll log the forms and get out of your way. He blocked the door. You ever wonder where all this stuff goes, Calder? The research shipments? Guess it's better not to. For a moment his expression softened, almost pitying. You do good work. Don't mess it up by asking questions. Then, just as abruptly, he stepped aside. Have a good night, nurse. Amy didn't answer. She walked fast, refusing to break into a run until she reached the stairwell. Only when the heavy door closed behind her did she allow her knees to shake. At sunrise she met Ravi in the hospital cafe, the weak winter light making his skin look gray. She placed her phone on the table, the photo open. He leaned in. Where did you? In the morgue. They were preparing him before the paperwork was even filed. Ravi scrolled through the second image, the blurry code barely legible. AG12 research, that's a logistics tag. I've seen similar stickers on international transfer forms. We send in used organs for lab studies sometimes, but, he stopped. This is too fast. There's no way they cleared it legally overnight. Amy whispered, it's organized, Ravi. It's a network. He rubbed his temples. You need to stop. Whoever's behind this has power. You think the board doesn't know? Maybe even law enforcement? So what do I do, pretend it's not happening? He looked up, eyes tired. Sometimes survival is the only protest you get. That answer settled in her chest like ice. 3 nights later, a new patient arrived in the ICU, a young woman found unconscious near the river. No ID. No family. Her chart already listed her as an organ donor candidate pending stabilization. Amy stared at the line until it blurred. The girl was still alive. Amy approached Dr. Hartwell, the supervising surgeon. "Sir, why is there a donor status on a living patient?" He barely looked up from the chart. "Pre-authorization. Standard protocol in trauma cases." "Since when?" Hartwell's smile was thin. "Since I said so. You're an excellent nurse, Miss Calder. Don't overstep." That was the moment Amy realized how deep it went. The forged signatures, the missing transfer logs, none of it was random. The rot reached the highest offices. That night, while the ward dozed and the monitors blinked in sleepy rhythm, Amy opened a new file on her home laptop. She titled it Project Mercy. Inside she began compiling everything: the photos, the patient list, copies of correspondence, every suspicious discharge. She even recorded a short video confession, just in case. "I'm not running a crusade," she whispered to the camera. "I'm just tired of pretending not to see." By the end of that week she was no longer sleeping. Each time she closed her eyes she saw the crate, the frost, the label with a patient's name. Someone had slipped another note into her locker, a single printed word: enough. She tore it up, flushed the pieces, and tried to convince herself it was just intimidation. Yet every hallway echo sounded like footsteps behind her, every flickering light a signal. On her next shift, she found Lindell waiting near the supply closet. "Administration's asking about you," he said softly. "They think you're copying files." Amy forced a smile. "Then they're wrong." "Good," he replied. "Because if they're right, you'll disappear faster than one of our donors." He winked and walked away. Amy stood frozen, pulse thundering in her ears. Somewhere in the building, a pager beeped, then another. The ordinary rhythm of hospital life went on as though nothing were amiss. But Amy knew, the next move would have to be hers. She looked down at her trembling hands and whispered to herself, "If I vanish, make it count." Outside, dawn crept over Detroit, gray and cold, as the perfect nurse prepared for her last shift. Friday, February 24th, 2012. Snow again. The kind that falls without wind, blanketing Detroit in a muffled, uneasy quiet. Amy Calder arrived for her night shift at St. Agnes just before 6:30 p.m., wearing the same navy scrubs and the same quiet determination she always did. But tonight, there was something different in her eyes, a kind of calm that only came when a decision had already been made. Her colleagues noticed, though they couldn't name it. "Big plans for the weekend?" Janine asked as they scrubbed in. Amy smiled faintly. "If all goes well, I'll sleep for a week." The joke didn't land. By the time she clocked in, the ICU was already alive with the mechanical rhythm of another long night, ventilators sighing, alarms chirping softly, the shuffle of rubber soles on tile. Amy moved through it all with her usual precision. Vitals, medication rounds, comfort checks. But her mind wasn't in the room. In her locker sat a sealed envelope marked for a journalist at the Detroit Free Press. Inside were copies of transfer forms, organ logs, and the photographs from the morgue. She'd planned to drop it in a postbox before heading home. Just in case she didn't get another chance. At 8:42 p.m., the call light over bed 7 blinked red. Patient, Jane Doe, age unknown, trauma recovery. Amy entered the room, clipboard in hand. The young woman's face was half hidden beneath a breathing mask, pale and bruised but unmistakably alive. Amy checked her chart again, the donor authorization still printed at the top, even though the girl had a pulse. She turned as the door opened. Dr. Hartwell stepped in, flanked by 2 administrators she didn't recognize. "Evening, Nurse Calder," he said smoothly. "I see you're attending to our critical case." "Yes, doctor," she replied evenly. "But I noticed the donor notation." Hartwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "All handled. Focus on stabilization." The administrators stood silently, observing. Amy felt their gaze like a weight on her shoulders. She nodded, finished the check, and left the room without another word. Back at the nurse's station, she caught Ravi's eye. He was reviewing charts, but his face was pale, tense. When she approached, he whispered, "I heard from a contact at the medical board. They've had anonymous complaints about missing donor paperwork. Someone's listening." Amy exhaled shakily. "Then we need to push harder. I'm sending everything tonight." Ravi frowned. "That's dangerous. If they suspect you." "They already do," she said quietly. Midnight came and went. The hospital dimmed its lights, and snow pressed thick against the windows. Amy made her rounds, ticking off vitals with mechanical calm. At 1:13 a.m., she slipped into the break room and sent one final email. To redacted@freepress.com. Subject: Urgent, whistleblower evidence. Meet me tomorrow morning. Don't involve the hospital yet. If I don't show up, check the envelope postmarked to your office. My name is Amy Calder. She pressed send and deleted the message from her outbox. Her reflection in the dark computer screen looked foreign, hollow-eyed, resolute. Around 2 a.m., she caught sight of Lindell again. He was pushing a supply cart toward the elevator, his badge clipped upside down, as always. But something was different. He wasn't wearing hospital scrubs. A heavy black jacket instead. The elevator doors opened. He nodded to the man inside, one of the new security contractors. Amy's stomach dropped. She waited until the doors closed, then hurried to the nearby stairwell. She ran down to the sublevel corridor, the same one leading to the morgue. The door was locked, but a faint mechanical hum came from inside. She swiped her badge. Access denied. She tried again. Same result. Then, faintly, a voice through the door. The transfer's scheduled for 4. Don't screw it up this time. Followed by laughter. Amy pressed her ear to the cool metal. A second voice, deeper, familiar. Hartwell's. Everything's prepped. No mistakes. We can't afford attention. Her heart raced. She stepped back, realizing she was shaking. Then she pulled her phone and typed a message to Ravi. If something happens, check the freezer room. She hit send. At 3:18 a.m., she returned to the ICU, trying to look composed. Janine was finishing paperwork. You good, Ames? You look like you've seen a ghost. Amy forced a small smile. Just tired. When Janine left for her smoke break, Amy went to the staff room, pulled out the manila envelope from her bag, and checked it one last time. Everything was there. Every proof she could gather. Then she noticed it, her locker door slightly ajar. Inside, her coat had been moved. Her stethoscope, usually coiled neatly, lay tangled. And taped to the inside wall was a small red sticker. Donor, priority clearance. She froze. For a moment the hospital around her felt utterly silent. By 5:30 a.m., Amy's shift was nearly over. The snow outside had stopped, and a pale light crept into the hallways. She walked one last time through the ICU, checking each patient, memorizing the faces she'd spent years caring for. At the nurse's station, Ravi caught up to her. "Promise me you'll be careful," he said. "I always am," she replied, but her tone gave her away. He handed her a small keychain drive. "Backup of my records. Just in case." She looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you." Ravi hesitated. "Amy, whatever you're planning." She smiled faintly. "Too late to stop it now." She squeezed his hand and walked away. 6:12 a.m. Amy clocked out for the final time. She walked to the parking lot, boots crunching over the thin ice. Breath misted in front of her face. The horizon glowed faintly pink with sunrise. She unlocked her silver Honda, placed the envelope on the passenger seat, and started the engine. Her phone buzzed, another message from Ravi. "Don't leave the hospital. They know." Amy read it twice. Her heart lurched. She looked in the rearview mirror. The black SUV was parked near the maintenance building again. Engine running. Headlights off. She gripped the steering wheel. Then she exhaled and whispered, "Do it anyway." She reached for her seatbelt. A sound. A door opening. Before she could turn, a dark figure appeared beside her car window. "Amy Calder," a man's voice said. She didn't answer. The next moment came in flashes. A sharp smell. A sting at her neck. The world spinning. Her phone slipping from her hand. The door flung open. Snow swirling in from the lot, white against the black asphalt. 6:57 a.m. Janine walked out of the hospital, pulling her coat tight. She noticed Amy's car still idling near the gate, headlights faint in the dawn. "Hey, Ames," she called, knocking lightly on the window. No answer. Inside, the driver's seat was empty. The passenger door half open. Her phone still on the seat, screen cracked, a message half-typed. "Ravi, they're here." The keys still in the ignition. The heater still blowing. The snow falling softly into the driver's seat, melting against the warmth. By sunrise, Amy Calder was nowhere in Detroit. At 7:12 a.m., the morning shift began at St. Agnes. The smell of coffee drifted through the corridors, and someone was already complaining about the weather. Life moved forward, as it always did in hospitals, even when something unspeakable had happened just outside. Janine was the first to raise the alarm. She had assumed Amy had simply fallen asleep in her car. Night shift exhaustion was a running joke, but when she opened the door and found the seat empty, the engine humming, and the phone glowing with a half-typed message, the laughter caught in her throat. Within minutes, security had sealed off the parking lot. Officer Keene, the same gray-mustached guard who'd waved Amy goodnight, stood beside the Honda and rubbed his temples. "No footprints except hers," he said. "No struggle, no blood." "Maybe she went back inside," someone offered. "She didn't," Janine whispered. "Her coat's still here." By 8 a.m., the Detroit police were on site. Detective Carl Donovan, a man who carried his exhaustion like armor, crouched beside the car. He noted the still-running engine, the warm air venting through the cracked door, the faint trace of perfume over antifreeze. He turned to Janine. "When did you last see her?" "About an hour before sunrise. She said she was heading home." "Was she upset? Arguing with anyone?" "No. Just tired." But Amy, she wasn't the type to walk away. The hospital buzzed with whispers all day. Maybe she snapped. Maybe she ran off with someone. Maybe she saw something she shouldn't have. By noon, the rumor mill had overtaken patient rounds. Administrators called an emergency meeting, reminding staff not to speak to reporters. A brief statement went out. St. Agnes Medical Center is deeply concerned for our colleague, Amy Calder, who was last seen leaving work early this morning. We are cooperating fully with law enforcement. That was all. No mention of the phone, the idling car, or the text message that ended mid-sentence. Ravi read the statement twice, jaw tightening. He hadn't slept since the night before. Amy's last text still burned on his screen: "If something happens, check the freezer room." He waited until his shift ended, then walked down to the basement. The morgue door was padlocked. A new digital lock, installed overnight. When he asked security for access, they told him the room was temporarily sealed for equipment calibration. Ravi's stomach twisted. 2 days later, Detective Donovan requested surveillance footage from the hospital's East Lot cameras. The IT manager, a nervous man named Fitz, handed him a stack of drives. "Cameras were under maintenance that night," he said quickly. "Static most of the time. We only recovered partial frames." Donovan slid one into his laptop. The video showed Amy's car. The timestamp froze at 6:40 a.m. Then jumped ahead to 7:03 a.m. No one entering, no one leaving. He leaned back. "So 23 minutes of nothing?" Fitz shrugged. "Technical fault. Happens." Donovan eyed him. "At the same time your employee disappears?" Fitz said nothing. By week's end, the case had hit local headlines. "Nurse missing after night shift." Photos of Amy, smiling, bright-eyed, utterly alive, filled the news feeds. Comment sections bloomed with speculation. Some said she was abducted. Others claimed she'd faked it. Ravi watched the coverage in silence. He'd already gone to the police with what he knew, her fears, the forged donor files, but the detective's polite nod told him they didn't believe him. "We'll follow up on all leads, Doctor," Donovan had said. But so far, we found no sign of criminal activity at the hospital. 2 days later, Ravi's office computer was confiscated for data review. None of his records were returned. A week passed. Then another. The hospital staff moved on in small, guilty increments. Amy's locker was emptied for sanitation purposes. Her ID badge deactivated. Her name removed from the shift rota. Janine kept her mug on the staffroom shelf, unwilling to throw it away, but even she stopped mentioning her after a while. Late one night, Ravi went to the bar across from the hospital and met with an old friend, Ellen Torres, a freelance journalist. She was trying to leak something, he told her. Illegal organ transfers. "I think she found proof." Ellen raised an eyebrow. "That's a heavy accusation." "I know. But she gave me a flash drive before she vanished. Half the files are encrypted, but the ones I could open, there are duplicate death certificates, missing patient IDs. It's not random." "Have you gone public?" "I tried. My email was blocked. IT says it's a system glitch." Ellen tapped her pen. "Send me what you have. Off the record." He hesitated. If they're watching. They're always watching, she said. That's why you tell me. 3 days later, Ellen's laptop was stolen from her apartment. Only the hard drive was missing. The next morning, she called Ravi from a payphone. Your hospital's donors, some of them show up again in private clinics under different IDs. I found transfer invoices routed through a shell company called Reagan Research. Where are they based? Mexico City. Then the line went dead. When she tried calling again, the number was disconnected. By March, official attention had waned. Detective Donovan was reassigned. The case file, #12-317A, sat in a cabinet labeled pending/low priority. One evening, he opened it again out of habit. Something bothered him, the list of organ donors from St. Agnes that month. 6 names, all deceased within 48 hours of arrival. No next of kin. All tagged for research. He scrawled a note in the margin, check Reagan Research connection. Before he could follow up, he was told to drop the case. Jurisdictional overlap, his captain said. It's federal now. It never appeared on any federal docket. Ravi tried to carry on, but every corridor of the hospital whispered Amy's name. He began noticing small changes, new security staff, unfamiliar faces in administration, a sudden increase in research grants. The hospital board released a statement boasting of its international partnerships in medical innovation. He quit 2 months later. No one stopped him. On his last day, he found an envelope slipped under his windshield wiper. Inside was a single photograph, a close-up of Amy's hospital ID badge lying on cracked pavement, streaked with snow. No note. He left Detroit that night. Years passed. The case of Amy Calder faded from the headlines, replaced by new tragedies. St. Agnes expanded, rebranded its ICU, and opened a gleaming new transplant wing funded by private donors. Some nights, Janine still dreamed of the car in the snow, engine running, heat blowing into emptiness. Ravi moved to Chicago, teaching at a medical college, avoiding questions about his time in Detroit. Detective Donovan retired early, muttering about ghosts that didn't stay buried. In 2019, a podcast called Missing in the Motor City revisited the case. They interviewed old staff, read portions of police reports, speculated about human trafficking links. The final episode ended with the host saying, "No remains were ever found. No confirmed sightings. Only an empty car, a broken phone, and a story that no one seems eager to finish." Listeners flooded the comments with theories. She was taken. She ran. She knew too much. None of them guessed the truth. Because 10 years later, in 2022, a humanitarian NGO in Guatemala would find a volunteer nurse named Elena Carter, an American woman with calm hands, a faint Detroit accent, and eyes that never quite stopped scanning doorways. But that discovery belongs to another chapter. The heat in Guatemala was the kind that clung to you like a living thing, thick, humid, and relentless. The kind that made time feel slower, like even the air had to struggle to move. In the mountain village of San Isidro, the locals knew her as Señorita Elena. She was quiet, kind, and tireless, a nurse who worked for a humanitarian NGO clinic called Salud Sin Fronteras. She arrived 5 years ago with no family, no accent they could place exactly, and no interest in her past. But when children got sick or mothers labored through the night, Elena never left their side. She was a mystery wrapped in gentleness. No one would have guessed she was once Amy Calder, the ICU nurse who'd vanished from a Detroit parking lot 10 years earlier. It was the summer of 2022 when fate, or perhaps unfinished business, finally caught up with her. The NGO had recently partnered with a global health alliance to establish rural dialysis programs. That meant new faces, new donors, and a sudden influx of foreign officials visiting their clinic. Among them was Dr. Mariana Ruiz, a Cuban-born nephrologist working for a European charity. She was sharp, direct, and didn't believe in coincidences. On her second day, Ruiz noticed something odd: Elena's handling of an emergency patient. The woman had gone into renal failure. While others panicked, Elena's hands moved with trained precision. Ruiz watched her, noting the quiet authority, the reflexive terminology, the calm under pressure. When it was over, she approached. "You've done this before," Ruiz said in English. Elena hesitated. "We all learn quickly here." Ruiz smiled thinly. Yes, but you intubated like someone who's done it 10,000 times. The nurse didn't respond. But Ruiz had already decided, this woman wasn't who she claimed to be. Later that evening, as rain beat against the tin roof of the clinic, Ruiz knocked on the staff dormitory door. Elena opened it, surprised. "Forgive me," Ruiz said, stepping inside. "But I have to ask. Why does your medical registration number on the NGO form trace back to Michigan, USA?" The air went still. Elena froze, every nerve tightening. Her voice came out steady but low. "That's impossible." Ruiz pulled out her phone, showing a screenshot. "I checked. Amy Calder. Registered ICU nurse. Missing since 2012. For a long moment, there was only the sound of rain. Finally, Elena sighed and sank into a chair. "You shouldn't have done that." Ruiz sat opposite her. "Then tell me why you disappeared. People don't just erase themselves unless they have to." Amy looked out the window, at the lightning flickering over the distant hills. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than the storm. "I tried to expose something. They killed people for organs, Mariana. Not rumors. Real people. And when I found proof, they came for me." Ruiz frowned. "Who?" "Doctors. Administrators. A whole network. My hospital was only one piece." She hesitated, then met Ruiz's eyes. "I woke up 3 days after they took me, in a warehouse outside Windsor, Ontario. Someone there was supposed to process me. But he didn't. He let me go." Ruiz blinked. "Why?" Amy shook her head. "I never knew. I think he thought I was worth more alive. I ran. I crossed into Mexico, changed my name. Eventually, I ended up here." Ruiz leaned back, absorbing the weight of it. "You've been hiding for 10 years. "I stopped hiding. I just started over," Amy said. "These people need me. And no one here asks questions." Ruiz studied her for a long moment, then said softly, "But you can't keep running from the truth forever. The network you exposed, it might still be out there." Amy's expression hardened. "I know. And they still have power." Ruiz nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time they didn't." A week later, Ruiz made a discreet call to a contact at the World Health Oversight Commission, an international agency investigating medical corruption. She didn't give names, just hinted at a witness tied to U.S. hospitals and organ trafficking. Within days, 2 investigators arrived quietly in Guatemala under the guise of a health audit. Their questions were polite but precise. When they finally approached Amy, she felt her stomach twist. They introduced themselves as Agent Lopez and Agent Shaw, from an international health crimes unit. "Miss Carter," Lopez said gently, "we believe you're someone else. Someone who can help us stop a global organ network that's resurfaced in Central America." Amy didn't answer right away. "And if I say no?" "Then it keeps going," Shaw said. "And more people die." Silence filled the small clinic office. Finally, Amy nodded. "I'll talk. But I want protection and anonymity. I've lost one life already. I won't lose another." Over the next month, she told them everything. The files, the forged donor lists, the faces of the doctors who profited from death. Her testimony, though given under the name Elena Carter, was verified through forensic evidence the investigators later obtained from old St. Agnes archives. The revelation was explosive. Reagan Research, the shadow company linked to St. Agnes, had evolved into a global supplier of medical parts for elite private clinics, funneling organs from developing countries under fake research contracts. Amy's story connected the missing dots, the original American operations and their international expansion. Her statements became the backbone of a sealed report that implicated not only doctors, but board members, investors, and even 2 elected officials in the U.S. health sector. The world, however, would never hear her name. When the report leaked to international journalists months later, the fallout was seismic. Hospitals across 3 countries were raided. Reagan Research was dismantled. Several high-profile arrests followed. But the report credited the exposure to anonymous source, Witness A. In a quiet office in the Guatemalan highlands, Amy watched the news on a flickering TV. Her hands trembled, not from fear this time, but release. Ruiz appeared in the doorway. "You did it," she said softly. Amy smiled faintly. "We did it." She turned off the TV. "Now, maybe people will live because of it." Ruiz nodded. And you? Amy looked out toward the hills again, where children played under the orange sunset. I'll keep doing what I do. Taking care of people. That's all I ever wanted. That night, Amy went out to the clinic porch, the same way she used to watch the sunrise in Detroit after her night shifts. The jungle hummed softly in the distance. She took a deep breath, the humid air heavy and sweet, and whispered to no one in particular. I made it out. For a brief, fleeting moment, she let herself cry, for the girl who once believed hospitals were always sanctuaries, for the lives lost to greed, and for the strange peace she'd found in exile. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and went back inside. There were patients waiting. And Amy Calder, the nurse who had died in Detroit and been reborn in Guatemala, had work to do. Rain came down in sheets over Guatemala City, drumming on the roof of a nondescript government safe house. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting sterile light across a table covered in files, laptops, and coffee cups. Amy Calder, still known officially as Witness A, sat across from Agent Lopez, the same investigator who'd first found her. Her hair was shorter now, her face sharper with age, but her eyes still carried that steady resolve she'd once worn in Detroit's ICU halls. It had been 6 months since she'd agreed to testify. 6 months of hiding, rehearsing, and revisiting memories she'd buried so deep they still made her tremble when she spoke them aloud. Are you sure about this? Lopez asked gently, sliding a signed affidavit toward her. Amy nodded. If I don't speak, they'll keep doing it. And I won't run again. Her voice didn't shake. The trial was to take place in Washington, D.C., under sealed proceedings. The world knew the scandal as the Reagan case, but the details were classified under medical crimes with national security implications. For Amy, it was simply the end of a decade-long nightmare. Lopez arranged for her to testify remotely, from behind a digital barrier that concealed her face and altered her voice. The prosecutors referred to her only as Witness A 214. On the first day of the hearings, Amy sat in a small, dark room, her image broadcast live to a courtroom half a continent away. The defendants were a gallery of powerful men in tailored suits, doctors, hospital executives, biotech investors, each with practiced calm and blank expressions. But one name on the list made her chest tighten, Dr. Raymond Hartwell. Her old supervisor. The man who smiled as he signed donor forms for patients who were still breathing. The man she'd last seen outside the ICU door, whispering orders to have her silenced. He sat at the defense table, older now but unmistakably the same. Amy's hands trembled as she adjusted her headset. Ready, she whispered. State your name for the record, the prosecutor began. I'm testifying as Witness A 214, Amy replied, her digitally filtered voice soft but firm. Were you employed at St. Agnes Medical Center in Detroit in 2012? Yes. In what capacity? Registered ICU nurse. 12-hour night shifts. The questioning was methodical at first, her duties, her observations, the missing paperwork, the altered donor forms. But when they reached the night of February 24, 2012, the room fell into absolute silence. Amy described it all, the locked morgue, the overheard voices, the syringe pressed to her neck, waking up in that freezing warehouse. She didn't cry. She didn't stumble. Do you recognize any of the men who orchestrated this? Yes, she said simply. Are they present in this courtroom? There was a pause. Yes. The prosecutor nodded. Please identify them. Amy's gaze flicked to the courtroom monitor showing Hartwell's face. Her voice, digitally disguised, still carried the tremor of memory. Dr. Raymond Hartwell. He authorized the procedures, falsified donor reports, and threatened me when I questioned them. Hartwell leaned to whisper to his lawyer, feigning calm, but his eyes betrayed panic. As her testimony deepened, Amy's details began to unravel the network's full structure. The Reagan scheme had started as a research partnership between hospitals in the U.S. and donor programs abroad. In reality, it was an international organ harvesting ring laundering human tissue through medical supply chains. Patients listed as deceased donors were sometimes still alive when their organs were removed. Some were undocumented immigrants, others homeless, some victims of staged accidents. Amy's words exposed the rot. When the prosecutor asked, "Why didn't you go to the authorities sooner?" Amy hesitated. Then, Because when I tried, they made sure I disappeared. Her voice caught slightly on that last word. In the courtroom, a murmur rippled through reporters and observers. During cross-examination, the defense tried to discredit her. They claimed she was delusional, that she'd fled Detroit under psychological distress. They produced doctored psychiatric evaluations allegedly signed by the hospital's wellness department, documents Amy had never seen. But Lopez and his team were prepared. They countered with time-stamped backups of her whistleblower files, the recovered flash drive Ravi had once saved, and financial transfers linking St. Agnes's research department to Reagan's offshore accounts. The defense's argument unraveled quickly. Yet the biggest shock came not from Amy's testimony, but from a witness no one expected. On the trial's fifth day, the prosecution announced a new supporting witness, Dr. Ravi Patel. Amy froze. For years, she believed he was either dead or too afraid to speak. But when he appeared on the monitor, a little older, wearier, but very much alive, she felt something in her chest finally ease. Dr. Patel, the prosecutor began, "You worked with witness A at St. Agnes?" "I did," Ravi said. "She was one of the most competent nurses I ever met." He confirmed everything, the altered records, the donor tags, the threats. And when asked why he stayed silent for so long, he glanced down, shame flickering in his eyes. "They made an example of her," he said. "I thought she was gone. I thought if I spoke, I'd be next." Then he looked directly into the camera. "But she survived. And because she did, I don't have to stay quiet anymore." Amy swallowed hard. It took everything in her not to cry. The trial dragged on for months. But the evidence was overwhelming. Hartwell and his co-defendants were convicted of human trafficking, medical fraud, and conspiracy. Several hospitals were placed under federal investigation, and the Reagan scandal became one of the largest medical ethics cases in U.S. history. Yet even as justice played out, Amy refused to reveal her identity publicly. Her lawyers offered her relocation, witness protection, even the chance to reclaim her name. She declined. "The world knows what happened," she told Lopez. "That's enough." Weeks after the verdict, Amy met Ravi one last time. In a quiet cafe near the courthouse, they sat opposite each other, two survivors bound by guilt, relief, and something like peace. Ravi smiled faintly. "You know, for 10 years, I thought you were a ghost." Amy smirked. "Sometimes I thought so too." He reached into his coat and slid an old photograph across the table, the ICU staff, smiling beside a Christmas tree in 2011. "We were so young." Amy traced the edge of the photo with her fingers. "We were. And we believed hospitals couldn't hurt people. Now you know better?" "No," she said softly. "Now I know people can." They sat in silence a while longer, the kind that comes only when there's nothing left to explain. Before leaving, Ravi said, "What will you do now?" Amy smiled faintly. "Go back. There's work to be done." A month later, in the Guatemalan hills, the clinic reopened after the rainy season. A familiar figure in scrubs walked through the courtyard, laughing softly as children chased each other around her legs. On the clinic wall hung a new sign. "To those who choose compassion over fear." Amy touched the plaque gently and whispered, "For all of them." Then she turned back toward the ward, where a patient was calling her name, Elena. The nurse smiled, her voice steady, her hands sure. After all, the woman who vanished in Detroit didn't die that night. She was reborn somewhere no one could ever find her. The sun was rising over the Guatemalan highlands, a slow, golden bloom spilling across misty hills and the sound of roosters echoing through the valley. It had been 2 years since the trial that shook the world and quietly rewrote medical ethics laws across 3 continents. 2 years since Amy Calder, under the name Elena Carter, helped dismantle one of the most insidious organ trafficking networks ever uncovered. The world had moved on. The headlines faded. But Amy had not. The clinic in San Isidro was alive with morning chaos, coughing children, the smell of antiseptic, the chatter of patients lined up at dawn. Amy moved among them like a calm current in a rushing river, checking vitals, giving shots, scolding gently, smiling often. Her Spanish had improved. Her heart had softened. But some nights, when the air grew still and the jungle insects sang their rhythmic chorus, she could still hear the hum of a Detroit ICU monitor in her dreams, the cold beep that marked every life she tried to save, and the ones she couldn't. That morning, Ruiz arrived from the city with a file under her arm and an unreadable expression. "Busy as always," she said, stepping into Amy's office. "There's always someone to patch up," Amy replied, without looking up from a chart. "What's in the folder?" Ruiz sat down, hesitating before sliding it across the desk. "Official documents. The Oversight Commission finally declassified parts of your case. They've issued new licenses for all cooperating witnesses." Amy blinked. "Meaning?" "Meaning you're legally free to return. As yourself." The words hung in the air like something dangerous. Amy set her pen down. "Return where?" "Detroit. The States. Anywhere. Your record's been expunged, your nursing license reinstated. You don't have to hide anymore." For the first time in years, Amy didn't know what to say. The idea of returning, to the city that broke her, to the ghosts she left behind, felt impossible. Ruiz leaned forward. "You can go home, Amy." Amy's eyes met hers. "I am home." Still, that night, she couldn't sleep. The thought gnawed at her, like an unfinished heartbeat. Detroit wasn't just where her nightmare began, it was also where her truth had been buried. And maybe, after all this time, she needed to face it. The next morning, she told Ruiz quietly, "Book one ticket. Detroit, winter, 2024. Snow again." Cold enough to sting her skin the moment she stepped out of the airport. The city hadn't changed much, the same gray skyline, the same weary beauty of a place that never stopped trying to heal. She rented a car under her real name for the first time in 12 years. Amy Calder. Driving past the industrial ruins, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. The face staring back was older, lined, but alive, defiantly alive. When she reached the familiar corner of Jefferson Avenue, her breath caught. The sign for St. Agnes Medical Center still gleamed against the overcast sky, though the building itself had been renamed Mercy Detroit General. She parked across the street and sat for a long time, watching patients and staff hurry through the glass doors. New faces. New uniforms. A new era built over old bones. Finally, she stepped out. Inside, the lobby smelled of disinfectant and fresh paint. There was no trace of the corridors she'd once walked for 12-hour nights. Yet her body remembered every turn, every echo of her own footsteps. When a young nurse passed by, Amy smiled politely. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Does anyone here remember a nurse named Amy Calder?" The woman frowned. Can't say I've heard that name." "You sure she worked here?" Amy nodded faintly. "A long time ago." "Well," the nurse said kindly, "whoever she was, I'm sure she did good work." Amy smiled. She tried. She found the old ICU wing, now a surgical unit, and stood by the window that once overlooked the parking lot. For a moment, the world seemed to rewind. She could almost see it, her silver Honda idling in the snow, her phone glowing on the seat, her breath fogging the glass. It was strange to look down at the same spot and feel nothing but peace. As she turned to leave, a plaque on the wall caught her eye. "In memory of all who served with compassion at St. Agnes Medical Center." Her throat tightened. "Even me," she whispered. She left a small paper note beneath the plaque before walking out. It read, "Do the right thing, even when no one's watching. AC." That night, she met Ravi at a quiet diner on Woodward Avenue, the same one where they'd once shared coffee during overnight shifts. He almost didn't recognize her at first. "You really came back," he said, voice trembling with disbelief. "I had to see it," Amy replied. "I had to make sure it was real." They talked for hours, about life, guilt, and the strange piece of survival. Ravi told her he'd started a foundation to support whistleblowers in healthcare. He wanted to name it after her, but she refused. "Name it after the truth," she said. "That's all that matters." When they parted outside, Ravi said quietly, "You could stay. Work here again. Detroit could use someone like you." Amy smiled. "Detroit already has people like me. They just need to remember why they started." Then she hugged him, a long, silent embrace, and walked away. 6 months later. Back in Guatemala, the clinic thrived more than ever. A new wing was under construction, funded by international grants born from the Reagan fallout. Children painted the walls with bright sunflowers. On the first day of the new ward's opening, Ruiz handed Amy a small envelope. Inside was a photograph, a dedication plaque from Detroit. The Calder Initiative for Ethical Medicine and Human Dignity. Amy stared at it for a long time, her eyes glistening. She hadn't asked for legacy. She hadn't wanted her name on anything. But seeing it there, as a promise instead of a headline, felt like closure. She placed the photo inside her journal and smiled. That evening, the clinic lights dimmed as the sun melted into the horizon. Amy walked outside, listening to the soft hum of night creatures and the laughter of children echoing from nearby homes. For the first time in years, her heart felt light. She whispered into the warm night air. Some stories don't end with running. They end when you stop being afraid. She looked up at the stars, quiet, infinite, merciful. And with that, she turned back toward the clinic doors, ready for another shift. Because Amy Calder, the nurse who vanished into the snow, was never meant to be a ghost. She was meant to be a reminder that doing the right thing might cost you everything, but sometimes it gives you your soul back.